morning. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you on a fantastic Tuesday to this BWPeople Randstad Leadership Dialogues. Randstad Leadership Dialogues have become quite a hit, and you can see at the participant count already at 120 within 10 seconds of joining. So clearly, people look forward to the Randstad Leadership Dialogues. Today, we are talking reimagining work, workplace, and workforce. They all are interrelated. If work has changed, workplaces will, and if workplaces have, then workforces need to. We have an exciting panel of leaders from various walks joining us. Let me call in Ms. Mankiran Chowhan, Managing Director, Indian Subcontinent for SAP Concur. Mankiran, thank you for joining us. Let me welcome Paul Dupuis, who's the MD and CEO of Randstad in India, and he's the author of a best-selling book called The E5 Moment. Paul, welcome. Mr. Dupuis.
Thank you, Annurag. Great to be here.
Yes. We also have Ms. Pallavi Tyagi. She's the CHRO of the Capgemini in India. Welcome, Pallavi. Thank you for joining us. Last but not the least, we have Dr. Rahul Kalia, who is the Medical Director of the International SOS in India. And today we are talking about safety back to work, or safely back to work. So clearly, Dr. Kalia's experience will come into play, and all our panelists complete the conversation. Now, let me start by saying that, we would say flexi work. Now, we used to call it work from home. I don't call it work from home. We can work from anywhere. It can be in a hotel lobby. It can be a coffee shop. It can be home. And the flexi work will only get accentuated because we've discovered the advantages of that. Having said that, I also believe Paul has been talking for the last 3 months about the concept of presenteeism. Presenteeism is not engagement. And sometimes engagement doesn't even come from work from home or flexi work. It works for a certain set of colleagues who are self-motivated, self-starter, but it doesn't work for a lot of colleagues. And there are practical issues also, like when you talk of entry-level jobs, they have a single home, both the parents could be working, and they have 2 children who need 2 separate rooms for their studies. So for them, actually going to the office may be a better idea for them to work and for their peace of mind. So we have to be hence safely back to work. So today we will discuss safely back to work. Let me bring in Dr. Rahul Kalia first and ask him. Dr. Kalia, tell us what has changed in the last 6.5 months and how do we get back safely to work?
Well, thanks, Annurag. Pleasure to be here. I think the past 6 months have been a roller coaster. That explains it all. I think there have been ups and downs. The G-forces have increased and decreased. And all of them have been related to the surge in the pandemic and the surge in the infodemic. I think our anxieties have by far, gotten the worst of us. So that's been, in a summary, the past 6 months. We all, as of now, understand the challenges that COVID poses. COVID is a small virus, but the pandemonium it has caused is something that we are reeling under. It has impacted every aspect of our life, personal, social, and professional. So for the purpose of this discussion, I'll maybe limit my pointers to the professional space. Return to work for a lot of us is a misnomer because we've been working from home, right? So we're not returning to work anyway. I mean, I was corrected by a colleague out of US, but I used this expression accidentally, and I said, so what are your return to work strategies? He said, I have been working from home. It's my return to office strategy that I want to talk about. Of course, I stood corrected, and I would like to bring that connotation here as well, that it's, of course, return to offices and operations, which we need to look at structurally. There are many influences. India currently is not in a good shape, predominantly because the pandemic is raging faster than ever. And while the cases are increasing in the community, a lot of industries are compelled and feel compelled to bring people to work. And that's why that is work in offices, that is out of their homes and so on and so forth. So this combination is not the ideal combination. However, India is not the only country facing it. We are seeing the second wave come up in Europe, which is, of course, as damaging, if not more, as the first wave was in terms of its disruptions. Return to operations or return to offices, it's got to be a structured approach. We ask ourselves three questions when we talk about return to operations. We said, why do we want to come back? When do we want to come back? And how do we want to come back? Now, given the current scenario, the medium-term future, we don't know what the long-term has in store. A lot of predictions have been made, but I wouldn't want to go to the long-term, which is maybe 3 to 5 years hence. The medium-term, let's look at the next 24 months. We will have a variable population working from home and from offices. So this percentage will shift depending upon which part of the country our colleagues are in, our offices are in, and what is the risk there. And hence, the return to operations strategy has to embrace this skew or this evolving percentage of work from home and work from offices. However, the return to operations has to be very well thought out. Why is an industrial, so to say, question? That is an organizational question. It pertains to the risk appetite that organizations have. The only people who can answer this question is, of course, organizations with the help of experts. A lot of companies on one end of the scale are saying, we're not coming back to offices till about June 2021. We've seen those declarations being made in the public. And that's fine because their businesses are not impacted, because virtual working does not impact their businesses. On the other hand, we have the manufacturing sector, we have the services industry, where you cannot do regular routine business without being in offices. Okay, so the two ends of the scale, organizations have to find the middle path. And that's where the answer to the question why is very subjective to a particular industry vertical, and within that, to a particular organization basis their exposure. If the decision is made, of course, to bring a certain percentage of people back in offices, then comes the question, why? How? I'm shifting to the last question, because how we want to bring them back to work is the nuts and bolts of things. All responsible organizations already have a plan in place. It's been a while and we've all learned from each other, we've taken experts' helps and we've designed a plan. What is important today is to make sure that those various modules of return to operations in the how element, the nuts and bolts of things, disinfection, sanitization, screening, testing and all that. So all those fancy things have to be kept updated because the pandemic and the nature of the virus is evolving. Well, the nature is the same. Our understanding of the virus's nature is evolving. With the vaccines being at a particular time frame and so on and so forth. So the how element comes there, which is the nuts and bolts of things. An act of will can get you started, but it's a maintenance that is important. Now, the last question, which is actually the most pertinent one, is when do you pull that trigger? When do you start coming to operations and when do you scale up the mobilization plan? Now, that is a very difficult question to answer at this stage, because if you look at India is growing at a very rapid pace. And for India to peak in terms of the first wave and then drop, it's going to be multiple months. But if you look at individual cities and states, the trends are variable. So one must look at India as many countries within a country, and that will help put a method to this madness as well, at least helping you answer the question when. The flexibility in your plans will need, of course, to be visible.
Thank you, Dr. Kalia. These are your opening comments. We'll come back to you with questions, specific questions. But at this point, let me bring in Paul. Paul, your opening comments on how do you get safely back to work? And again, to qualify, physically safely back to work. We are at work virtually, but how do we get back to work physically? How do we go to our offices physically? So let me say that. Let me tell you that early morning we have 212, now 213 attendees on Zoom and on our Facebook page and Twitter handles. So there must be about 1,000 people, could be more. So just want to let you know. So clearly what you say matters. All.
Thank you, Annurag, and thank you everyone for joining us today, our fellow panelists and everyone who's on this webinar today in partnership with Businessworld and Randstad, the Randstad Leadership Dialogues. It's a very important topic that we're digging into today. I'll keep my opening comments brief, and we can follow up with some questions later. I would just look back for a moment. When I arrived back to Bangalore, here in Bangalore from Delhi, March 15th, certainly had no idea that we were about to go into complete lockdown mode. Randstad, with 75 offices across the country, went from business as usual to business as unusual. In 2 days, 48 hours, every single employee across the four corners of the country, from Guwahati all the way down to Kochi, were at home. And our first response was to ensure that people were safe. And I've been meeting and discussing with a lot of CXOs over the past few months. In fact, my last count, I'm at 500 face-to-face, one-to-one meetings so far since March, all virtual, of course. And I'm hearing the same story. All leaders shifted into let's protect ourselves and our people immediately. That was the first phase, so safety. Then we looked at how can we engage? And the engagement activities have been remarkable. I must say, working for a global company like Randstad, India is constantly in the spotlight of Randstad with all the cool initiatives that we do here on engagement. Everything from launching a radio station to Zumba to yoga and cooking and so on. I mean, incredible creativity in India, the most connected country perhaps on the planet. And then we shifted to productivity. How do we continue to move the wheels? And to Dr. Kalia's point about we never really left work, I think we all agree that we're busier than ever. So the next phase is really about what's next, and that's what we're here to talk about today. How can we continue to ensure that people are safe while also moving the wheels more quickly? Productivity, output, getting the economy going, protecting lives as well as livelihood. That's where we're at now, and that's what we're going to focus on today.
Thank you, Paul, for being brief. And I started with Dr. Rahul Kalia, but in the second round, I'll start with whoever is last. So it will be equalized. So don't think if you're second, third, fourth, it will become first, second, third. I want to mention that I do a daily TV show and I get guests, but it gets equalized by the end of the day. Let me bring in Mankiran, your opening comment, Mankiran.
Thank you for having us, Annurag. I think both with what Dr. Kalia and Paul have said, there's a lot of contemplation happening about the when and the how and the shift from productivity to the well-being of our people. The world certainly shifted beneath our feet this year, it feels. And I think it's also compelling organizations to do things differently. There's been a tremendous amount of conversations I've been involved with where people are challenging the very premise of how things got done, whether it was how books got closed or whether it, how you looked at inventory or what you thought was capable, just as a normal means of things or policies that you've relooked at. So I think with this discussion of coming back to work, there will be a lot of changes we will expect, and I'm sure we'll talk about it eventually. But I think employers have to support the need of this already new talent that was, in the business, the millennials that we were talking about, the Gen Z workforce. And I think we need to be mindful of the freedom effect that they will be coming in with expectations. The freedom to work from anywhere, or the freedom to thrive or work faster or go anywhere, and how technology and how our organization policies, etc., are in support of getting ready for that environment.
Thank you, Mankiran. Let me bring in Ms. Pallavi Tyagi, who is the CHRO of Capgemini in India. Pallavi, your opening comments.
Well, thank you so much, Annurag, for having me on this panel today. As we headed into the pandemic, we went into work from home, and we enabled 95% of our employees to work from home very, very quickly. We also ensured that the productivity did not get hampered or impacted as a result of the shift from office to work from home. We had flexi work options even much before that we had gone into the work from home scenario for all employees. So it's not a very new situation for us where we would have employees working from office and working from home as well. As an organization, we are working on a long-term strategy to look at, given all safety protocols and guidelines followed, as prescribed by the government, followed by WHO, etc., is when we will look at our employees coming back to office. But right now, we're in a planning stage.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. You were really brief. So let me only say that when you were doing work from home, flexi home policy, that was a choice. Now you have a compulsion. So that's the only nuanced difference. Let me start by asking you follow-up. Now, employer branding has been very critical. Do you think safety will become an important part of that employer brand?
So, sure. So as you rightly said, employer branding is important, right? And as part of that, safety has become and will become more important. Safety for our organization has always been primary requirement, even as I said, when we were working in office and now work from home. If we look at employer branding, it actually impacts the entire spectrum of an employee life cycle in the organization. It also impacts the potential employees who want to join us in future. So one cannot really ignore employer branding, especially in times like these, right? So there have been considerable time spent on building an employer brand. And as we will go along, it will just help create a more differentiation in the market if there is given more focus around it. I think safety is also about trust. It's do the employees trust you as an organization? And trust is a very, very important element of leading effectively in an environment that we are in today. So it requires encouraging a mindset and a culture of carrying on tasks, as an example, with just minimal supervision. And hence it becomes extremely important to look at safety, as you rightly said, as an element of employer branding itself.
And Pallavi, if I may ask, emotional safety has been always big. Psychological safety for employees. Tell us, what have you done? Give us some moments of truth at Capgemini in the last few days, weeks. And when do you see a substantial part of your workforce returning back safely to work in a physical way?
Right. So, we have introduced recently, and by recently, I mean a couple of weeks ago only, one pillar as part of our diversity and inclusion. And we call that as happiness and well-being. So while safety and well-being was always an important part of our culture, of our DNA, we have introduced what we are calling it as happiness and well-being for our employees. And just as Paul mentioned, we have daily guided sessions with experts, with doctors on health-related topics, ergonomics. But as part of the happiness stream, we have also instituted a laughter club. We do daily meditation sessions wherein we've had more than 10,000 employees who have participated in this stream. What we also did in order to ensure the well-being for our employees, while we do have our employee assistance partner, we also have, enhanced our medical insurance. We signed up with Portia for a 10-day health package where it's a home care medical facility provided to our employees and their dependents. So there's a lot of work which has been done around well-being, and we continue to focus around it. When it comes to physically coming back to the employees, as I said, we are working on the plan right now, and we will look at the timelines accordingly, and we will follow what the government guidelines are and ensuring full safety for our employees. We are also redesigning our offices as we in order.
Okay, thank you, Pallavi, for sharing those best practices. Paul, let me come to you. You recently launched the Safely Back to Work Best Practices Handbook. Tell us a bit from the handbook. It's literally a playbook for being safely at work physically. And tell us, how can this handbook add value to fast track that back to work safely movement, so to say?
Right. Thank you.
Office is not just an office where you work. It's
right.
a social connection.
Right.
It is about getting away from home for some people.
Yeah.
It is about making human relationships more meaningful. And some people, collaborate internally and externally. So for them, the office space in a physical way becomes important. So give us your inputs, Paul.
Thank you, Annurag. Well, I'm very proud to to say that we launched this handbook, which is entitled Safely Back to Work. And I would take a note of Dr. Kalia's comment and say, safely back to the workplace, wherever that place is. Maybe we should add place at the end of safely back to work. I would agree, because we work from anywhere now. Let me just tell you a little bit about how it began. Randstad, as a company that is covering 39 countries, we have about 92% of the global GDP within our reach in the markets where we operate. And in India alone, we put 60,000 people to work every day. So this is a very important responsibility. Safety is at the center of everything we do. A safe environment, of course, and an environment where our employees are cared for. Now, this crisis began, as we know, in China, and that's one of the countries where we have a large presence, like many multinationals. Then it started to move from country to country, as we all know, as it happened. In a strange way, India has the benefit of being later on the curve, or we had the benefit. And that gave us the opportunity to learn from other countries, and we did that. So what happened was in April, as the crisis started to loom and the COVID was spreading through Europe, an idea was born with Randstad and McKinsey. The idea was to come up with safely back to work protocols for the world. And who better to do that than someone who employs hundreds of thousands of people every single day and puts them to work across all industries, across countries. So we actually came together with Adecco and Manpower. So the top 3 staffing and recruiting companies in the world. This is an unprecedented effort. If you think about your top 2 direct competitors that you go toe to toe with every day, we actually checked our competitive spirit at the door, and we said, let's come together shoulder to shoulder to help the world get back to work. It's really a remarkable effort. And again, with McKinsey's support pro bono, we started to develop these protocols based on best practices across borders. And we launched these handbooks in different countries. India was then in progress, and we brought in a company called GI Group as well to support us. We've since had sector bodies like NASSCOM and OP and others come and support us on this journey. Now, the best practices, the protocols that are in this handbook cover all the major industries in India. And I won't list them all up, there's 7, but you can imagine they're all the key industries that we all operate in. From manufacturing right over to frontline retail, fast-moving consumer goods. And certainly there are the nuts and bolts of protocols on the how-to. We know the why, lives and livelihood. The why is crystal clear. The how. So we have a very useful handbook that has takeaways, posters, and so on that can be used for organizations to help people get back to work. We also talk a lot about the mental health piece, the emotional health piece, which is equally important, as we've all discovered. And at Randstad as well, we've taken on a partner called Your Dost, which is an EAP organization, and they've been wonderful. We have since extended that service to our 60,000 contingent workers for Randstad. Something I think we're the first in the world to do that within the world of Randstad. So coming back to the handbook, this has been received very well from sector bodies, from government here in India, and also from companies who are looking for that trigger moment, as the doctor mentioned, of when to allow people to come back to the workplace. And of course, everyone who's participating in the webinar today, you will receive a link after the webinar where you can download. I look at this as open source code. It's for everyone. No one owns it. We all share it. And so by all means, please leverage this. It's been created for India based on global best practices. And so, safely back to work is really about 2 things. It's about the physical safety, but it's also about the emotional and mental safety. And Annurag, what we've discovered in all of our surveys in India and beyond is most people are afraid to go back to the office. There's still a high fear factor. Now that may come down over time. If I look at the Netherlands, where our world headquarters is, certainly the fear factor has come down comparatively to India. In China, it's also come down from being extremely high, where 90% of people didn't want to come to the office, and now it's coming down to 70 to 60 to 50. In India, we are still quite high, and we're seeing most studies are showing that in most organizations, 70 to 80% of people don't want to come back to the office. And one conclusion from the handbook is we can create safe spaces in our offices. We can ensure they are clean zones and safe zones. But what we can't control is what happens between point A and point B. And that's where the biggest concern is. In other words, when someone walks out of their home and travels to the office, whether they're taking the metros and taxis and so on. And so some of our recommendations in the handbook is how do we handle the A to B portion of this story, not only the workplace. And so that's, in a nutshell, what the handbook is all about. And I look forward to sharing it with everyone on this.
Paul, I don't want to be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. but do we really need an office space?
So another great question. I happen to be leading a global, what am I going to call it? I don't like the word project, a mission, which is future-proofing the way we work for Randstad. So I'm leading this across the world of Randstad. And we are questioning the very notion of what you just asked me, Annurag. Do we need an office? Do we need office space? Now we know there are large global companies in India alone that have reduced their footprint significantly. One company announced they're reducing their space by 1 million square feet in India alone. Now, that's a bold decision. The assumption then is that the office no longer becomes as important as it was before COVID. What we do know is we're moving towards a hybrid way of working. Working from anywhere, working from home, working from remote will become more and more normal and accepted. And so I think the simple answer to your question is the office becomes less important as a place to do work. I believe that the office will be redesigned and repurposed as a place to collaborate and celebrate.
I love that. Office is a place to collaborate and celebrate. We already have 7 odd questions for all our audience. I will take the questions around 11:20, and at 11:05 we'll do an audience poll and question. So do participate. We have about 238 on the Zoom, which after 7 months of Zoom fatigue is very good. I keep saying we moved from gloom to doom to Zoom. So, and we have our Facebook page again. So about 1,200 audience. So that's a huge audience. Clearly there is interest in the topic that we're discussing and the quality of the panelists. Mankiran, let me come to you. Now you heard Paul, you heard Pallavi, you heard Dr. Kalia's opening comments. What is your personal, you lead a very large organization. What is your personal vision of a future work environment?
So I think, everything that Paul's spoken is true, and I'm sure we could debate on either sides on relevance, but I like the idea of collaboration and celebration. But let me talk about this with a story. Let me start this future work environment with a little bit of a story. If you remember back in February of 2014, the London Underground system went on a strike. And this was a massive system that has 4 million trips every day. And when the strike hit, lots of Londoners had to figure out a different way to get to it, right? It was absolute chaos. And after the strike ended and the dust had really settled, the Transit Authority looked at the data, and what they found was really astonishing, that thousands of people had found new ways of how to get to work. And they never went back to their old commute, right? So in that chaos, they actually discovered that there was a better way. And thanks to the strike, Londoners figured out how to spend 22,000 fewer hours sitting on a train. And the commute got more efficient, and that stayed that way, and they never went back. So it became the new normal for that commuters, right? And I think there's a very powerful message in that story is about that for us, COVID-19 is that event. And it's not about getting back to where we were, but it's about getting back to what will be different, and it's about creating something that's better. So, that would be my quick, answer to that question, Annurag.
Let me ask you another follow-up. How are you gathering feedback from your employees? And there is a very, very good quality of questions coming. So I said I'll take it at the end, but let me ask this question to all the panelists. I think it's the best question in a while. Niyati Madasu is asking, good morning. The most pertinent question is, how do we measure performance in these times where business goal metrics are completely changed? How do we actually measure outcomes? And what is the quality of outcomes vis-a-vis physical office and a virtual office? Mankiran?
Sure, and thanks for the question, Niyati. I think from a expectation perspective, we've also, if you look through expectation of employees as well as employers, is going through this radical change. Month of March, where I know Paul said you walked out of office on the 17th thinking you'll go back on a flight the next week. I remember not taking my laptop charger thinking I'm going to come back next week, right? So expectations of employees and employers, and how that was in April in the world of doom and the world of Zoom and an over fatigue, and now getting back to resiliency. So I think it's an evolving year, and expectations have to be jointly agreed between the employee and the employer. For a lot of people, being at home has had elderly parents, young children. So the flexibility of working hours in terms of what you defined as work hours has gotten redefined. I know from my own personal perspective.
Boundaryless,
The
expanded.
The boundaryless has gotten expanded, the days have stretched, and therefore for some it has added the strain, for some it's added the flexibility. So, and it's also, it has become, very open to interpretation of what that good looks like, and making sure that transparent, open communication between both the employee and the employers in terms of what is expected. Is it the outcome or is it the hours? Is it, it is turned into this outcome-led, you're preparing for X, so you're getting this done, versus I saw you in office at 8 o'clock, right? So that shift is a good shift, and hopefully the transparency in dialogue will help create more of it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kalia, the most important thing in the last 6 months has been compassion. It has been caring for your employees, listening to them, creating their emotional well-being, holistic well-being. As a wellness expert, is there a playbook to creating this holistic well-being where you get the outcomes, but you also are very happy and looked after colleagues? I mean, it was always there pre-COVID. Tell us how do we do it post-COVID? Especially people have anxiety. People are not going to malls. They're not going to restaurants. They're not going to hotels. So clearly there is a fear of going out of home, right? So how do you address that?
Well, thanks for that question, Annurag. A very difficult question. I must start out by acknowledging. I can speak for an hour on this one, but just to share the crux of the matter, health and wellness strategies in organizational relevance will need to be reimagined. We were anyway struggling with mental health issues before COVID came in. Everybody speaks about mental health, but when we do the soul searching, we don't really know what we are trying to achieve as initiatives. A lot of great initiatives and work is being done by almost every organization and the mental health industry. However, when you start measuring the outcomes, and this question is actually very good because you're talking about outcomes and not just process, right? Now, every initiative has two measuring yardsticks, either a process-based metric or an outcome-based metric. And I put it in the context of a health and wellness, so to say, vision and initiative. A process-based metric would be to capture how many people came for a very good session. Could be on a psychological resilience webinar done by a leading expert in the world. How many people came to that session is a process-based metric. We've been tracking that for an eternity. And we are measuring our success and of engagement basis the number of people who joined. But how many truly benefited from that session? How many had a happiness index go up? How many deferred a depression? How many had a measured increase in productivity? See, these are the gray zones, and these are, within the scientific parlance, unmeasurable or have been unmeasurable so far. And I think moving forwards, this is an area that will need a lot of, I hate to use the word engineering in a medical context, but this will definitely need to be re-engineered. The metrics, the definition of those, we've got to start with the lowest hanging fruits. And what are the lowest hanging fruits? The non-communicable diseases. They haven't gone anywhere. We are still allowed to have high blood sugar levels despite COVID being around. Yeah, I mean, those who have diabetes, that is. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the existing problems still remain, and COVID has come in and hit us hard and added to our strain, that is the stress levels. So in summary, what I'm trying to say is that a balanced approach is definitely important. Focus on physical and mental health is very, very important because they're so interlinked. I mean, the compelled potato couches that we have become, just because, I'll cite a small story. Right in the beginning of the lockdown, one of my colleagues went out for a run only to be chased by a cop with a stick so that he's pushed back into his building. Guess what? This guy has gained 7 kgs ever since. Now, the point of the matter is that we've been compelled to be physically, sedentary and mentally burn out. So that's the balance we got to strike. Strategies have to look at that. But you used a very important word, right up the front, the compassion. From an organizational perspective, there are multiple things that need to be done. But at the heart of it all is a culture, an organizational culture. Now, COVID is or has been a geological event. It's no different from an earthquake. It has moved things in our approach to work and life, right? Now, these are the moments that also influence organizational cultures, both positively and negatively. I think one has to be open to the fact and take this as an opportunity to enhance that considerate part of the culture, the compassion in the culture. I can see very clearly, and I'm supporting, and we as a group, as International SOS, are supporting a lot of Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies as medical advisors in the fight with COVID, right? And we are seeing most organizations who have that considerate culture, more visible considerate culture, are happier. You know, they're not just worried about the employee productivity today, they're also conscious that the productivity is not a challenge. My consideration is for the employee not to burn out. So what I'm saying is we learn from each other. There is no playbook, there is no textbook, if I may, or a big 2,000-page guidance book which tells you what to do on which day for what problem. We are writing a book as we walk along. And that's where I highly appreciate, Paul, you talking about that playbook that you spoke about and these experiences that we are collecting together. Because we've got to pick up the best amongst each other and then, of course, implement that at our workplaces and, of course, in our employees' lives. So that would be my mixed answer, not a crisp one, but I hope that works.
Anurag, I'd like to answer just add one point. There's a wonderful report which I just read yesterday. I refer everyone on this webinar to check it out. It's the 2020 Global Culture Report by O.C. Tanner. Wonderful insights into exactly what Dr. Kalia just said. Talked about organizations where people feel safe physically and psychologically perform 3 to 4x better than their competitors. If you want to talk about measurable outputs, there's some really interesting data. That's O.C. Tanner 2020 Global Culture Report.
Thank you so much. We'll definitely read it. I haven't read it. Thank you, Paul. Dr. Kalia, only thing I would comment is that, there is a fear factor. There's a lot of anxiety. So I think a lot of listening is required, if I may say. Leaders need to listen. And second is the self-care. As a leader, if Paul doesn't look after himself or Pallavi or Mankiran, we also have to look at the self-care of each one of us. I think that's equally important. Sometimes we burn ourselves to help other people because we like it. We want to contribute. But we have to, as leaders, also understand that self-care is very important. Like when you're in a plane, put the oxygen mask first, then you can help others, right? Simple analogy. Let me go to Pallavi. Pallavi, I want to ask you, there are about 16 questions and the count on the audience is only growing. So clearly there is some substance and takeaways from what you already have spoken. But give us some specific inputs on what your organization has done to be able to kind of give that comfort, best practices, give us 1 or 2 inputs. And at this stage, just before Pallavi comes in, there is an audience Q&A. Please participate in it. And in about 10 minutes, we'll take all the questions.
We've already spoken about trust, and I totally agree with what Dr. Kalia said, right? And what you said, self-care is important, and care for the employees is also very important. When you talk about trust, for instance, Annurag, we as an organization have gone ahead and paid our bonuses. We gave merit increases and promotions to our eligible employees. So that was the promise we had made to our employees, and we kept to it. We've enabled many policies, whether engagement, work that already Paul spoke about. We also went ahead and we started looking at, for instance, development. So we looked at eligibility criteria for mobility, for instance, for our employees. And we went ahead and changed that mobility policy internally to, increase transversal mobility across roles for our employees. Like all other organizations, I'm sure they've done that. We introduced an all digital learning platform. And today we have more than 69,000 employees who are using the curated courses that we have from Harvard, Coursera, etc. So there's a lot that we have done as an organization to ensure not only engagement, well-being and health, happiness, but also making sure that we are focusing on development of our employees. If we look at our engagement scores, it's been the highest ever in the last 1 year. So that speaks for itself to say, that we are truly taking care of our employees.
Thank you. Mankiran, what are you doing at SAP Concur to be able to practice what you preach?
Sure. So I think, you'd asked me the question about how are we gathering that feedback as well. So, as we continue to focus on business efficiency, it's really important to remind ourselves that even with the best systems, best technology, it doesn't work if employees are in distress, right? And as we all learn to navigate this new terrain collectively, we've focused on really ensuring that the employees' concerns were heard in order for us to address those gaps. At ACP, we've done 2 sets of remote working pulse survey checks, and that input, really allowed us to have that intelligent intervention based on what the employees have been, their sentiment, their feedback, and looking at that analytics and insights into guiding them and guiding the managers on making the right employees. So I know Pallavi's spoken about it, and I've heard so many from my experience of talking to so many people. We're hearing about the daily meditation yoga and training programs and medical insurance for home care. And one thing I really enjoy is the well-being holiday, and everybody in the organization taking that holiday, which is outside, of course, the future-ready infrastructure policies and employee assistance programs. So I think all of that has been fairly well adopted. I've been at ACP for about 15 months, and there were 2 things that really stood out for me. One was this empathy for action pledge, which really is about enabling this people-centered approach, and that focuses on eliminating any complexity from the user experience so that employees can get the best experience so that they can then deliver the best experience. And the second thing was really around mental health. Never before have we put in that amount of focus collectively as the industry around mental health. And I think more the conversations get normalized around mental health, we're able to speak transparently with employees about it and have clarity and routine around this topic. We're strengthening this, acceptance of mental health and hopefully preventing another looming crisis, right? So I think from our perspective, regardless of what the challenge is, 2021 will bring, we will never lose sight of that focus that we have, and we will continue to aim to invest in building this diverse, inclusive, collaborative, future-ready workplace where everyone's their most authentic self, and therefore they can succeed in business and ultimately help drive ACP's mission to help businesses run better as well.
Thank you so much, Mankiran. Paul, let me bring you in. Your organization works with lots of leading corporates, both Indian and multinational. Now, what are the kind of conversations you're having with your clients? Give us a slice of that. What are the conversations they are having with their colleagues?
So it really is broken down into 3 phases, Annurag. As I said earlier, when I spoke to our clients, and we have more than 2,000 companies we work with in India right now actively, and I met with many CEOs and CHROs, CXOs, and so on. In March, April, it was all about safety. It was all about, let's close our doors and make sure our people are safe. Then the question marks, how long will this last? Well, then we know what happened. No? And by the way, the modeling was telling us that this would peak in India sometime in mid-May. Then that was extended to mid-June, and then mid-July. Latest we heard from the Ministry of Health and Protiviti has done a modeling saying mid-November, and I'm sure Dr. Kalia has thoughts on this. The modeling is never going to be completely accurate because we still don't completely understand the virus and how it's spreading right now, particularly in India. So there was the first phase, which was respond, and we shifted to safety mode. The second phase was recover. Okay, how do we now navigate through this ambiguity, adversity? We don't know when this is going to end, but we do know we need to keep moving the wheels, protect lives and livelihood. The third phase right now is what we hear a lot about, reimagining. And it's really about proactively moving forward into this new world. My conversations now are quite inspiring with companies. The one big concern, other than the safety piece, which we are addressing through the handbook and so on, is the question of the workforce. So a lot of companies have been battling, and I would say CXOs, the thing that keeps them up at night right now, the ones I speak to, is what to do about the workforce. If we continue to face these challenges of the economy slowing or not regaining the momentum we had coming into 2020, then what do we do with our workforce? How do we handle it? Some companies reacted quickly, swiftly, and cut some of their workforce. What we're advising companies to do is do exactly the opposite. Protect your people, but rethink your workforce planning strategy. And this is where, and I just want to put on another hat for a moment, Annurag. While I'm CEO of Randstad, I'm also an executive board member of the India Staffing Federation, representing the more than 1.3 million contingent workers in the formal economy in India. And for a long time, temporary workers were the unprotected workforce, and we're working hard to make the unprotected protected. And what I've discovered is that many companies, Indian multinational, like small to extra large, are now embracing this notion of workforce planning, more strategic workforce planning, embracing contingent labor, increasing the piece of the pie within their workforce of contingent labor, and also looking at the gig worker and freelancing and so on. So in a way, crisis brings opportunity. When it comes to the nature of work in India, clearly we see changes emerging.
Thank you, Paul. I can't help but ask this question. It's not in the script. But if you wrote this book called The E5 Moment, and if you were to rewrite this book, the second edition, what would be different in it? What chapters would get added?
Well, the 5 E's would stay the same, Annurag. I've been through lots of crises. I've been in, I was in Japan for 25 years. I had been through 2 massive earthquakes, including the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown. So crisis, there is something about leadership in crisis, which I think is timeless and borderless. So the 5 E's would stay the same, but I would have included these learnings that we've had over the past 6 months from this crisis, which again is unprecedented. I would have included anecdotes and stories and some of the inspiring experiences that I've had from this. And I probably will do that in a future edited version. Okay.
Before I bring in audience questions, there is an audience poll. Tanvi Raghav, if we can just put the question on the, so the first question, the main poll question is, what challenges does your organization face to safely getting back to work? Employee safety, employee productivity, employee mental health and well-being, or employee trust? Please poll. I'd recommend all of our 238 logged in participants and other people watching this broadcast, please poll. It will help us in assessing what's in your mind and what are the challenges you're facing. I'm getting questions on the Zoom webinar chat. Employee trust. So clearly vote in the poll. Kavita, vote in the poll. I got your answer, but vote in the poll. Now I want to ask you a last question and then bring in the audience questions. I have 21. I'll try to see how many we can bring. But the whole idea is interactivity. Let me start with Pallavi. Pallavi, if you had to make a prediction about the future of work and getting safely back to work, what would that be?
So for me, I think it will be a mix, Annurag, honestly. As I said, we had flexi work options, and to your point, we also had employees who were working from office at that time. We moved totally work from home. So I think, there will be some coming to office to work, some working from home, taking the flexibility again as they had in the past. But definitely what we do see is that a large portion in the entire employee population can now work from home. So that definitely has got proven as well. So for me, it's going to be somewhere in between. It's not going to be an either or.
Okay, Dr. Kalia.
Well, change is going to be the constant. I believe while the plans are going to be where they are, everybody aspiring to put more focus on employee safety, and rightfully so. Gain employee trust. I'm reading the questions and they're so relevant. While staying relevant from a business standpoint, right? So this balance will continue to shift. In challenging geographies like India, where the infection is just getting a stronghold, and to your earlier point, Paul, all predictive modelings have fallen flat on their faces because garbage in, garbage out, they're all dependent on only numbers, only data, and that's not something that we as a subcontinent are very strong in, right? So the future, well, resilience will truly be tested. We thought we'll all get into Diwali and wear the clothes that we like for our Diwali get-togethers in offices. Well, guess what? We are now looking at maybe doing that in next Diwali. To your earlier point about collaboration and celebration in the workplaces being retagged as. So again, resilience will be tested. I think the mental health, I'm going to focus on the health aspect of it. Awareness on the mental health issues is rising, and I think we should fuel that fire. You cannot solve a problem if you don't know of its existence. You cannot implement a change if you don't know what the magnitude of the problem is, and that's where I think the mental health issues are at. I firmly believe a lot of measuring needs to be done on the mental health problems that lurk around, so that you can efficiently target them. I firmly believe that this COVID era will teach us how to measure the problem, and of course we will need to implement those health and wellness changes to continue solving the problems in the future as well.
Okay, Rahul.
Change going to be constant.
Thank you. Change, resilience, and measuring how we are adding to the mental well-being. I think that's what I'll take away. Mankiran, your prediction for the future.
I think to win in businesses, we will first need to win in the workplace. And I think we need to be therefore really looking at, I think back to the conversation I was earlier having about working different. Our workplace and the workforce is going through this massive seismic change, and I expect there will be massive change in expectations when they come back to work as well. And I see them in 4 phases. 4 big phases at least. The first one's really about this whole self to work, right? Like we're all working with video conference calls with children, family, pets in the background, and lots of times we're getting to hear and see details about other people's home lives that we weren't really privy to before. So it doesn't mean that employees will want to bring their whole self to work, but I'm sure many of us will prefer to have that strict personal and work boundary. But from an organization perspective, we will need to be we should be expecting employees' expectations around it, and therefore what are we doing to adjust with it?
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Go ahead, make the second one. I thought.
So I'll very quickly talk about 2 other points. I think it's about the workplace flexibility. It's really about that arrangement and this. We've all gone through this emotionally charged experience, so that will really alter that expectation for employees as well. And therefore, as organizations, we need to be anticipating what the workers will be expecting when they come back from a policy or infrastructure. I think third's really about technology and the role of technology, where expectations of a very fully charged always on mode, whether think about cashless payment or e-wallets and how that integrates with our work life. And I think finally it's about this point we spoke about collaboration and celebration. One of the very unifying things about COVID is that all of us have gone in the same, we're in the same crisis together. So this experience will change employees' expectations about, what they want to achieve when they're in that collaboration space as well. So from an employer perspective, I think that's going to be an important area for us to consider as well.
Thank you, Mankiran. Paul, I want to get you to have the final word. But before I do that, let me announce the results of the poll. You saw it briefly on the screen, but 52% have voted for employee safety, 52%. So that's on mind. It's not that's why you have such a high. Second, 27% have voted for employee mental health and well-being. So clearly, these 2 are on, top of mind. We need to address these. We need to incorporate. Paul, your final comments and your prediction for the future before we take audience questions.
Yeah, well, I echo the point about resilience. We've all developed a new sense of resilience over the past few months, and agility. These are 2 competencies that will become more and more important for all of us. We need to find a way to measure them. But I would say that, if you look back, at least I can say growing up as a leader, I heard a lot about IQ as an indicator of potential success. And then this new thing came in called EQ, which was also an indicator. We realized it wasn't only about intelligence, but it was the ability to connect with people. But I believe the next one is coming right now, compassion quotient, CQ. The compassion quotient was something that many of us as leaders have ignored. And I would say that in this crisis and beyond, the leaders who will lead high-performing teams, the organizations that will continue to thrive through crisis and beyond are the organizations that take care of their people. So I believe that we're going to be talking more and more about compassion for action, and organizations that have a high compassion quotient will do well through the crisis and beyond. So that's something I'm very interested in learning myself as a leader, a new muscle to build.
Thank you so much. Let me take in these questions and anyone can respond. Let me take this very important question from Geeta Sasitran. She says, return to office can be as distressing as the pandemic itself. Since we have families, children, elderly members, with comorbid conditions. Shouldn't companies give the employees to choose the option to return to work? Shouldn't leaders take this into consideration to relieve the angst of the employee? Beautiful question.
Annurag, if I could take a shot, and I'm sure other panelists can fill in. I think certainly, absolutely, this is, I don't think from where we're looking, there is going to be a definite timeline where everyone will be expected to report back to duty, per se. Look at the organizations that have already opened up. I think they've already taken that approach. And even if you think about organizations, there is going to be there are many levels at where it probably needs to be addressed. One, from a regulatory perspective, it might differ from a state to from an area, whether from a regulatory perspective, just what the laws say. Then it might be just from an organization perspective of the ability, the readiness, like you said, infrastructure. Some people have taken long-term, options according to it. And then I think finally it'll be personal. So it will be a triangulated view as companies plan to return to work. But for employers, they need to be able to have the contingency planning, have the agility and resiliency built into the model so that we're providing a workforce. I think we're neglecting that a lot of people don't have the right infrastructure or live in shared apartments and need to come to work to be able to productively work as well. So I think it will be a combination of those three things, as I see it, that will drive this pace of when people will come back to work, or the flexibility with which they will come back.
Okay, related question Meenakshi Dabral is basically asking, will there be even more flexibility as, will you allow employees to choose to work from home? I mean, even when a lot of workforce has started to get back to office physically, will you allow, should leaders allow people to work from home, to look after their young children or somebody who's ailing? Pallavi, I take this to you.
So thank you, Annurag. I've spoken about it before. We had flexi work options even before the pandemic came in, and we saw a good uptake on work from home, which also we have had policies and we've had infrastructure in place in order to support that requirement. More so even now, as I said, since our employee base is working from home, for sure that flexibility will be given more and more, for sure, no questions about it.
Okay, Sonia Sani is asking a question to Paul, specifically to Paul. What are your thoughts on full-time employees giving away to gig workers, and how this will become a very important attribute for building an employer brand?
Well, there was two questions in there, isn't there? First of all, pre-COVID, I would have given the same answer when it comes to contingent labor and gig and so on. I'm a big believer that every organization needs to embrace various forms of work. And that's part of diversity, by the way, when we talk about diverse working workforce and work population, because that brings different perspectives, right? We also know that people have different stages in their lives where perhaps a gig or a temporary contract is more appropriate than a core full-time contract as well. What I do see, and we already see it, I can certainly comment on the data in Randstad in India. We have grown, our temporary contractual and gig business has grown steadily through this crisis. So that's an interesting observation, that indeed companies have realized that temporary and contractual and gig labor also provides the opportunity, the flexibility to upscale and downscale where necessary, while also protecting the business, the performance and the output. So I only see that increasing. The awareness is certainly on top of mind now for most of the CXOs I talk to. I think a lot of companies, more traditional companies, where again, it was all about presenteeism. Again, the world that many of us grew up in, right? Where you report to an office and you report on time and you're physically there. Well, those companies have had to make an extreme adjustment and shift to this new world, the more traditional companies. But I'm quite amazed at many companies that have gone from being very traditional and very analog to embracing tech, what we would say at Randstad, tech for touch. So I see that transition happening before my eyes right now here in India.
Okay, Dr. Kalia, let me take this question to you. Sanjay Jain is commenting and asking a question. I would like again to request an insight about how do we address safety and well-being in manufacturing sector, whereas you and Paul rightly said right up front, being physically present is an essential. So, you can give flexibility everywhere. But in manufacturing, if you've been not replaced by robots and have a job, how do you actually show up and make sure that you deal with all the anxiety?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that's the reality of our industries. While IT companies, most of them, and others who can afford working, will innovate alternative means of staying relevant. Manufacturing sector itself will either pivot or perish. That's the expression that we see. The answer to the question, how do we get safely back to work, is going to be very relevant for the manufacturing industry. The principles of the various modules of return to operation will remain the same, but the application will change from one manufacturing unit to another, from one, for example, automotive will not do exactly what FMCG does. Why? Because the engagement, the indulgence of the human element will be variable, and hence these customizations to the return to operations protocols will definitely need to be considered by them. A point that so again, before I go there, the answer to the question when is irrelevant for manufacturing sector, because guess what? Most of the manufacturing sector has been working through the pandemic. They never actually went back to offices. Of course, went back to homes, that is. The working percentage reduced and increased and depending upon the local government regulations. However, these are our colleagues in the manufacturing industry which continue to brave the storm. They also had many disruptions, and that's where the equation is, how do you manage risk from a doctor, from a very non-technical, I'm not a risk manager, but these are very humble thoughts. There are only two ways to manage risk, right? One is to take it away. Most of us did that by not exposing our employees on the company time. In the personal spaces, they choose to get exposed, and that's fine. But on the company's time, you don't expose them on company's road. However, if you can't take the risk away, and that's where the manufacturing sector comes in and many other compelled industries come in, then you got to mitigate the risk. And the answer to those questions of when and how are very relevant, because the why for them, why do we want to get back to work for them, is for relevance, right? So that is the answer. It's about when do you increase the mobilization and how do you make the workplace safe? A lot of leading organizations are endeavoring to be able to go on to a town hall, the senior most leader of an organization to go on a town hall and say with confidence that, guys, your workplace is as safe, if not safer, than your home. For you to have that confidence in ticking that box of saying that you haven't just done it on paper, but also on ground, is a lot to go by. And that's what the manufacturing sector will need to focus on, and just to make it sustainable. Minimize disruptions, follow diligence.
There are lots of questions. I'm not going to take general questions and comments. We'll be here whole day, which I'd love, but I think very busy people on the panel, so I'll let them go after some time. But there is one question from Geeta Sasidharan. I'm taking her, she's asked 4 or 5. She's asked a very important question. She's saying, while we talk about all this, and even the leaders, CEOs, number of hours have gone up, but we are being called to work, do meetings at time which are off traditional office hours. What do you have to respond to that? Pallavi and Mankiran, she's saying, we are being called to work beyond 6, 7, 8 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. Mankiran, you can take the question,
Sure,
I think.
I'll take the question. Good question, Geeta. And I think back to the point about working hours, given that we're all working from, given that we're all working from that home office, work hours certainly have stretched, right? But boundaries remain boundaries, and boundaries should always be maintained, from experience. And I think back in April, there was a feeling of everyone's just working from home. So you're anyways not working, so taking a call at 8 o'clock, is okay. But I think I would be surprised if that has continued very quickly. Through the month of April, the change to May, June, July that we saw was this reality adjustment that organizations also had. I know from our own team's feedback perspective, regardless of when people eat, we've put in 1 to 2 as as a no meeting slot, saying that not because people need that 1 hour for lunch, but a lot of people have had to cook with the lack of domestic help, etc. And
Pallavi, I want to take the question to you.
Yes.
Kavita Mangalapalli is asking, we are exposed virtually as individuals more than ever, and there is a need for virtual protection and support. What do we do if an employee is being trolled and targeted? How to mitigate the risk and support employees? Cybersecurity is a very important issue, she's saying. How do you respond to that?
In fact, cybersecurity is one of the most important areas, Annurag. And given the fact that we are now all virtual and digital, it becomes more and more so important. And we have very strict guidelines, and we look at it very closely. Individually, if an employee feels that they are being targeted, I mean, every organization has a grievance mechanism in some form or the other, right? And I would encourage this employee, whoever feels being targeted, to take on the grievance redressal mechanism, or even go to the human resources department. I mean, we are all aware of the fact that.
I think, Pallavi, I can't see you here. Let me take this question to Paul. Paul, there's a question, and I modified the question a little bit. Is when you don't have a physical office, how do you sustain the culture or build the culture? Because
that is going to be perhaps one of our biggest challenges moving forward. We just did a large intake of new grads into Randstad here. And just imagine being a new hire, a new grad, fresher coming into a company, very excited. And I sat down to have my welcoming town hall with this group of young folks. And I showed up in the attire I've been wearing every day to my internal meetings, which is a Randstad polo shirt, kind of casual actually. And they were all suited and booted, ready for business. And I thought, wow, this is a young, eager, aspiring group of people. And how do we engage with them without actually being with them? This is all brand new to us, Annurag. And I think we're learning as we go. But one thing we know is that, back to the compassion quotient, the leader that connects, that touches the people, using technology now at least, will have a better opportunity to create that culture. I think the other thing is, I mentioned earlier about tech for touch. We need to look at technology as a way to build that connection, right? And clearly, we need to also give people a voice. And what many leaders have done is fallen in the trap of micromanagement, because this was all new to us. We just started to manage calendars and manage schedules and make sure all the time was accounted for. But I believe that one way to address that is to go the opposite way, to give freedom in the frame, to give freedom to people to experiment. And ultimately, and I talk about this in my book, Annurag, about enabling, leader as enabler. I believe the leader of the future is all about enabling people to shine. Let them be their authentic self, as Mankiran had said. Let them be their true selves and let them shine. And ultimately, I think that's the way you build culture moving forward. It's no longer about the cool cafeteria at the office anymore. It's more about how we treat people.
I want to close. There are lots of questions. Pallavi, there is another Pallavi Patwari asking you if Capgemini is recruiting.
Yes, we are. We never stopped recruiting, and we've onboarded all our hires. So welcome. In case someone wants to apply for a role, we absolutely encourage that. And we've never stopped hiring.
Thank you so much. At this point, let me tell all the audience, from our 248 peak, we are at 185. And of course, we have about 600 on the Facebook and the Twitter. So let me say that all your questions will be answered one-on-one. The video recording will be sent to you on mail. But let me close this panel by getting the final view from each of the panelists. My question is that today, as I said, we have a compulsion. Tomorrow, hopefully very soon, we will have a choice. What is the balance and equilibrium for a safe workplace? I'll start with you, Pallavi, because you were the last when I started, and then I go down.
So it will always be a hybrid model, right? Ensuring all safety guidelines, that has to be the topmost priority when looking at coming to office. Whenever that happens in the future, we don't know what that timeline will be. It will be a hybrid model, and safety will be of the utmost importance. That's what we believe in.
Thank you so much. Mankiran, your final view?
So I think in closing, I'd say that employers will need to support the needs of the workforce or risk being left behind, and that's going to be universal. And there's this quote from Jack Welch that I will say is that organizations' ability to learn and translate that learning into rapid action is what will be the ultimate competitive advantage. And that's, I think, our opportunity. And I know I've heard this 100 times in the last 2 months or 3 months, saying in every crisis there is an opportunity. The question is, are we going to be ready to seize it, as I see it?
Dr. Rahul, Kalia?
Well, we got to heed to the signs, not only what we see in the community on the raging pandemic, but also the perception. I really like the expression compassion or compassion quotient that Paul, you mentioned. And that will need to be considered as well when we start inviting people to offices. So again, it's not just management of risk, but also its perception. And that's where I think the mental health equation comes in, both reactive and proactive. Just one last parting comment is 80% of our fight, especially considering what COVID is and how we fight it, is going to be behaviorally led. 20% is what we've spoken about. You do the how element or nuts and bolts, you set it up, you set up processes, you set up infrastructure, but then it's going to be people who use it, people who comply with the processes, and hence it's the behaviors that will need to be nudged. In our return to operations strategy, in our return or redefining new normal strategy, it's going to be the behavioral nudging that will need to be a very integral part of your organization's plans.
All your final comments.
I must say, I really enjoyed today's conversation. Before we went live today, we talked about takeaways and golden nuggets. I've got a few here myself. I've taken a few notes, so thank you to my fellow panelists. I hope our listeners today and viewers have also taken away something that's helpful. I come back to the original comment about the new world. It's interesting. Jim Collins in the book Good Great talked about the Stockdale paradox, confronting the brutal facts, right? And it's about realizing that the COVID crisis will continue. COVID is unpredictable, there's ambiguity, there's adversity. Let's accept that, right? And by the way, the 5 stages of grief, if you remember those, the 5th one is acceptance. So we need to accept that we're in this situation right now, let's deal with it. And I'm a big believer, and this is a kind of a guiding principle I've carried with me through my life, and my parents taught me 2 things. 1, you can't control what happens outside, but you can control how you react and how you respond. So we have a wonderful opportunity to respond in a way which is taking us to the future. And the final advice that my dad always gave me in tough times was, son, this too shall pass. And I believe this too shall pass, and we will get through it together, and we learn together. And again, that's why we're here today. I just want to say, Annurag, I'm getting a lot of messages here from people who have already downloaded the handbook. So thank you so much for downloading it, and you're finding it useful. That's good to know. Please, by all means, download the handbook, use it. It's for all of us, and we're all on the same mission, and that is to help India return to work and to the workplace safely.
Thank you so much. I've learned something as an entrepreneur. It's always, I'm learning something that I can implement, and it's given me thoughts that I can implement back in my organization. You can see the comments on the Zoom webinar chat, very good comments, and I do multiple sessions a day. So to have the quality and quantity of the audience that we have speaks volumes to the kind of panelists, and also the continued interest. Till 11:35, we had 240 people. So thank you, Meenakshi, Geeta, Sanjay Jain. Sanjay, Paul is saying, he's saying good things about you. Lakshman, Kodu Papa. Some of these names are a little tough, but a lot of comments you can see. So thank you to the audience for being an engaged audience. There are 32 questions we have not been able to take all. Some were similar, so we kind of bunched it, but we try and answer them one-on-one. All the best. We wish you all luck in what you're doing. Stay safe. Get back to work in the way it works for you and your organization. But safety is more paramount, and not just in physical safety, emotional safety, psychological safety. And it comes from making sure sometimes the physical is secure, because that's the crisis we are dealing with. We wish you luck. and look forward to another BW partnership on Randstad Leadership Dialogues. Randstad Leadership Dialogues are to build a better consciousness of this new normal and help you stay compassionate and competitive. Sometimes the two words don't go together, compassion and competitiveness. But trust me, if you're compassionate, it will bring out the best in your people, and that will be an edge in your competitiveness. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you, Mankiran. Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you, Dr. Kalia. And thank you, Paul, for being part of it. Thank you, my team at BW. Thank you, Rahul, Manju Lakshmi, Bhuvna, everyone at Randstad for making sure that we collaborate to deliver what we do. Thank you. Good afternoon.